Hi and welcome back to the Academy of Historical Defence, and I'm Nick Thomas, and today bringing you a first look at the new revised model of the HFA, that is Historical Fencing Armoury AHF Smallsword. So we've been using the AHF model. It is named after us because we did request certain specifications for a new model from them a few years ago, and we've now used them very, very extensively. Now, HFA, they're based in Ukraine, and because of the war they were out of production for a little while. Amazingly, they're now back, and this batch arrived with me yesterday. They were only sent a week or two ago, so they are now shipping products again, and they are sending and have stock of these small swords, which is excellent news because these have been fantastic for us. Now, they asked me to make a video comparing the new model to the old model. My video setup, my studio if you like, is not currently in use because I'm rebuilding it into something bigger and better, but it will be soon, and well, we might as well make use of this glorious Welsh summer that we have, which, yes, I am indeed wearing shorts. It is summer. Fantastic. HFA small sword. What are they? What has changed? How good are they? All these things. So HFA, they've been making small swords and various other, especially economy trainers, rapiers and small swords, for quite a number of years now. And in fact, we weren't the first ones to get on board there, but we saw their economy range, quite liked them, wanted some things changed, and so I reached out to them and said, can you make a new model with some changes? They said yes, they made the changes, and then they named it after our club. Fantastic. Now that one, the AHF small sword, was this. Now actually this has had a newer pommel fitted. We went through a few weights of pommel, and in the end we did settle on this lightweight one, but the owner of this sword, one of our club members, put a heavier pommel on, but it's the one I've got to hand to show you. Now, ignoring the pommel, what exactly was it and how has it changed? Well, the primary thing here is the guard, which is, as you can tell from here, is kind of very basic, bars welded together, basically rods welded together, as opposed to this, which is cut steel components welded together. So there are fewer welds, it looks smarter, it's tougher, but there are also a few other advantages. One, I asked them to remove this front quillen because small swords, most small swords did not have a front quillen, certainly the ones that we want to represent, and glove space. Now, when you use small swords, most small swords use épée blades or something like a musketeer or similar, sometimes a foil blade. So those are sport fencing style weapons, and as a result you want a Newton rated glove for it. So best thing you could do is just go and buy a sport fencing glove to use for this. But what if you want to fight against other HEMA weapons? So spadroon or broadsword or saber, that kind of thing. The stuff that small sword may well have, no, in fact definitely did fight in its time. What do you do then? Because you can't just wear a Newton-rated glove, because that has for thrust protection and offers no blunt force trauma protection, which is the main concern when you're dealing with a cut and thrust sword. Hence this. So not only is it a new, improved, stronger guard, it has more glove room in here. And I've tested this. You can wear Red Dragons. You can wear, in fact, every 5-finger glove on the market that I know of and have tested, apart from the Infinity. I haven't tested that one with this because I don't have one, although I know they are massive, the Infinity gloves. But aside from that, everything I've tested so far has fitted in here, which means you can use your sport fencing glove in this and it won't affect it, and that's absolutely fine. And when you want to fight something cutty, you can put on a Red Dragon or similar glove and use this in a cut and thrust fight, which is excellent. From a HEMA perspective, that's really valuable because we don't just want to be doing matched weapon fights, we want to do a whole spectrum. What else has changed? Well, we've got this new fancy matte finish. Over the years, they added steel guards because the originals were aluminium. So this is also a steel guard, although it's taken quite a battering. It looks like they've thickened the steel a bit more, but even so, it's steel. You can just hammer it back into shape. So that was used against cut and thrust swords. Bends a little bit, not a big deal, but I think this one looks tougher. So we've got a matte finish, new guard, and what else? The last thing to mention, which is a big change, is the tip. So, previously, Musketeer Blades. So a Musketeer Blade is just a double wide épée blade. It is as it sounds. It's an extra thick épée blade. So they weigh around about 220 grams, which is around about 70 grams heavier than an épée blade. And previously they were just blunted, and they had a rubber tip pushed over them and taped on, which works fine, but is slightly annoying because you've got to tape it on, it looks a bit messy, but also the rubber tips can split and decay, and also even taped on they can pull off and things like that. So it's a safety concern that you always have to be wary of your tip to make sure you should always be wary of your tip, that's good advice. You should check this regularly, and it can be a safety concern. Versus this new blade, and I didn't actually know they were going to do this, so that's quite a fascinating change. They've put a rolled tip on it. Now that is very typical of a HEMA sword as opposed to a sport fencing sword. Why is this a good thing? Well, it means that out of the box, as standard, we have a sparring safe tip. So that is nice and broad. That would meet all the safety standards that I've seen for tip safety. It's nice and thick. It's usually, most people would say an 8mm thick swollen tip or similar is about safe, and this is more than that. So it's an excellent safety tip, and it removes the safety concerns of tips falling off, splitting, breaking, that kind of thing. So I think that's actually a really, really good addition. So the changes they've made to this small sword overall, well, what they've done is they've brought it more in line with HEMA training swords as opposed to sport fencing swords. That isn't a disparaged sport fencer by any means. It's just sport fencing kit isn't always suited to all HEMA training. Now, why would you want it to be a double wide upper blade? Why would you want it to be fairly stiff? Because, yep, these Musketeer blades, they're more like the stiffer rapiers that are on the market. Okay, maybe like a Cavitan, for example. It's a Cavitan rapier, that's about the same thickness approximately. Why would you want that? Well, there are lots of kinds of small sword. Now, a lot of people that do small sword want to do the very, very nimble, agile versions of small sword. That's absolutely fine. There were plenty of historical small swords like that. But there were also plenty that weren't, that were actually very, very different. And so, for example, I've got a range of antiques, small swords. They're not my primary collection by any means. I mostly collect military swords, even though the small sword did see some military use, but we will talk about that in a different video. So, if you look at a small sword like this isn't even an extreme Kalishamard, for example. So a Kalishamard is the kind of bottlenecked, thick fort section like this, whereas the other one I'm holding here just flares a little bit. But if you look at its thickness, its width, it's hollow ground, so it's not as heavy as it looks, but it's still robust. So that's quite beefy. And even at the tip, it's not exactly too slender. And I wanted a small sword that could better represent these. And this comes quite close. It's not as refined, which is not so surprising. Remember, this is an economy small sword. Even with all the shipping, duties, customs, everything, they came out at £95, British pounds each, which is an absolute bargain. So no, they're not quite as refined as the originals, but they're not too far off. The balance is about 9 centimeters from the shell. The originals that I've got here, I've got 3 antiques that are all the meatier end of 18th century small swords. They all balance around 9 to 11 centimeters, so it's quite similar. Obviously, it's a little bit thicker here than the sharps, which means that then it's not quite as refined of movement. And I think actually HFA could make it a little bit thinner here, just to make it a little bit more agile. But it's not the end of the world. But I think it would be a nice improvement for the future. So these stiffer and heavier blades, they're both an advantage and a disadvantage. So I think as an advantage, they make for, in many ways, a cleaner fight. They can't be kind of flicked around so much. They're better suited to use against cut and thrust swords, which we really want to do in HEMA. And to some degree, I also think they stop people excessively over-penetrating, which is historically known to be an issue. And be a little bit more cautious with being stabbed themselves, because some people get a bit silly with these and just kind of, go for double hit stabs. And I think the stiffer blade, if you've got the protective gear for it, so not sport fencing equipment, so I'm talking about heavier HEMA padding, I think that's a good thing. That being said, there are also advantages to using an épée. An épée is lighter, it's softer, it's gentler, you can thrust deeper with it, and it's a bit more gentle on your sparring partner. Now, as well as the fact that it does represent some of the lighter small swords quite well. So this is an HFA, this one in my right hand is an HFA épée blade, this is an HFA Musketeer blade. So the Musketeer blade one comes out around 540 to 550 grams. If you mount it with their épée blade, the sword comes out around 470. So both of them within a historical range, and the balance on this one comes back down to about 5 centimeters as opposed to the 9 on this. And you end up with the very, very agile, more hilt-weighted small sword that it's much more nimble and much gentler on your sparring partner. Which of those would I recommend? I think if you need to go and basically talk to your coach, if you've got one. see what they recommend. Different clubs like Musketeer Blades or HFA Blades. Personally, in the HF, we use both. I think they're both excellent. They're both really useful training tools. They represent different ends of the kind of 18th century small sword spectrum, and in training, because of their rigidity and how they can work against heavier blades, there are advantages to both. So I think they're both absolutely excellent. Is there anything I dislike about this? Remember, it's an economy small sword, so don't expect a full quality or full looking replica. It's not designed to be that. It's designed to be cheap, durable, and just a good trainer. It's not designed to look quite like the real deal. That said, aside from the fact that the cup is obviously a lot larger than the originals, which I think is a good thing for a beginner trainer because it stops people taking too much punishment. So I tend to use more original style hilts on my personal small swords. I use a lot of HFA blades, but I tend to use fancier hilts because, you know, I don't need to be buying budget swords. As a HEMA instructor, I have a huge collection of swords. But in terms of my students and people I'd recommend stuff to, I think it's excellent. It offers extra protection to begin with. It's tough and can withstand some reasonable contact against cut and thrust swords. And its overall hilt length is pretty much bang on. Both the anolets, the hilt length is pretty bang on. And the knuckle bow, as you can see, is only a little bit larger than the original. So it does look a little bit elongated, and that is because it's designed to take bigger gloves. So if you want to put your red dragons in and similar. So yeah, is there anything I would now change on this? Well, the only thing I would possibly say is I think the tips of these blades, particularly as they've now got this rolled tip, I think could shim down just a little bit, like a millimetre off each side, just to make this just a little bit more nimble in the foible. Again, you could do that yourself, and I probably will do that to my personal one because I'm going to keep one of these for testing, as well as the fact that I'm going to keep it to use as my kind of loner and go-to when I want to fight against sabres and stuff like that. Anything else left to say? Well, not really. Some people like a heavier pommel. So, for example, this small sword, which belongs to one of our members, he's fitted it with a big heavyweight pommel. Now, personally, I think in small sword in HEMA today, a lot of people are using excessively heavy pommels, and that's because they want a small sword that feels super nimble in the hand. And when you put a really big pommel on a small sword, or some kind of musketeer or épée blade, you basically lose all the mass in the blade, and it just feels incredibly fast, which obviously has some advantages. But most original small swords that I've handled that are of a meteor blade, the musketeer type, not like an épée blade, they tend to feel more forward heavy, more blade presence, more control over the center line. And that is because they not only have a fairly meaty blade, is they don't have too much mass going back into the hilt. It's more carried forward like this 9 centimeter balance. You can see this musketeer blade with this monster pommel has come back to about 3 centimeters. That being said, if you don't like the fact that we went for this super light pommel, you can put any sport fencing pommel on that you like. So this one is actually, I think, an early HFA one. I've also put Leon Paul pommels on there. You can go and buy a pommel from any sport fencing company you want, and they're really, really cheap. But getting pommels that are actually this light is really tough. So I'd rather start with a light pommel, and if you want to get something heavier, it's so easy for you to go heavier rather than to try and get something lightweight. So yeah, if you want to do that and basically counterbalance the weight, that's entirely your choice. But this was by design light hilt and forward balance for something that has real blade presence, like the 3 antiques that I've got here. So there's the lenticular bladed one I've got here, for example. This actually balances at 12 centimeters from the shells. It's really forward weighted. The Kali Shamad is about 9 centimeters, which is about the same as the HFAs that I'm reviewing today. So if you want a small sword that handles like the beefier bladed small swords, so it has real blade presence and strength, and is good against also cut and thrust swords, then the Musketeer is fantastic for you. If you like to wear really thin, like sport fencing jackets, and you want to be able to thrust harder without, you know, hitting hard, then consider the épée blade. They will mount either one, and you can just change them anytime you want. So when I've bought from HFA in the past, I've just bought batches of blades. So this blade, for example, I've had kicking around in my stocks for ages, and I just mounted it on this latest batch, just so you could see for comparison what it would be like. So there you go. HFA small swords, they're cheap, They're robust. We've had them in use for years now. They're obviously not attractive, but they do a really good job. And because of the different blade options, you can represent a broad spectrum of 18th century smallswords. And lastly, to say, they will put longer blades on. So these are 82 centimeter blades, which is kind of a very, very typical representative length of a lot of original 18th century smallswords. If you want something longer, they will mount something longer. They'll do hugely long lengths of Musketeer blades and probably épée blades as well. Just bear in mind that this is a very light pommel designed for this blade, so it already feels blade forward in terms of balance. So if you were going to put a longer blade on this, I'd recommend you ask them for a heavier pommel, which they'll happily provide. So there you go, HFA small swords. I will put a link in the description. They are in stock at the moment. Lastly, I would say I don't have any financial connection to this company. I've given them advice because I wanted the best models for our clubs, and this model is named after us, but I don't make any money from them. I just buy their swords because they're really good, and it's great right now to try and support our HEMA brothers in Ukraine. So check them out, buy their small swords and other stuff from them. And I will be following with other reviews of their kit soon, because they've actually got lots of good products, especially their mittens that we've been using a lot recently, the heavy mittens. Anyway, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you haven't subscribed, please do so. Thanks for watching.